bad boys. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Welcome back to Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host, John Maley. We're going to pick up where we left off last week on cargo theft. We're going to talk about best practices in this episode, so stay tuned here. Our participants, welcoming back Elizabeth Robinson, Senior Vice President of the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association, Kathy Schricker, Vice President, Northeast Region, Avalon Risk, which is an insurance provider, Thomas Kern from Benish, and everyone's favorite, John Pruitt, Mr. Personality. Got to give you that, John, from Nutrabolt, which many of you know as C4. He's a transportation logistics manager, and everybody in here has some level of consistency dealing with cargo theft. And today I want to focus on what our task force officers have shared with us as best practices to try and limit the number of thefts and instances where we have opened ourselves up to the liability from the technology and the lack of communication and relationship in the industry now being more transactional based. I'm going to share some of these with you, and I'm going to call on you here. Your vetting procedure becomes more important from a carrier vetting process, okay? Should be gone over on a monthly or quarterly basis once you establish what you do or what your practices are going to be, so that you're changing and evolving with the times. The two officers have also shared updating any cybersecurity measures in your company that you possibly can, and be on the lookout for any phishing emails or anything creative that allows people to get into your system or choose to copy your identity or use your identity. Conduct regular checks on FMCSA, which we all understand is the government's database to ensure company profile integrity. Scammers have figured out how to hack in and change that information, so that's not 100% either. Utilize Google Assist with services for validation of who you're working with at all times. So we want to talk about these things. Of course, avoid Gmail. Land Start are some email domains that they're saying to avoid. Knowing your customers is always key, which I think lends itself towards our business model. But there's going to be more than that. There's going to be checks and balances with the shippers of understanding that we're loading the right product on the right people and that the people aren't someone else. So on this one, I'm going to start with Mr. John Pruitt. John, what practices have you adopted?
So good to be back, John. Quick intro. I'm the director of logistics for Nutrabolt. So one of our commodities, C4 Energy, has gotten caught up in cargo theft, in the past. I can't blame the folks for wanting it, but I certainly would prefer they buy it off the shelf. So we're trying to get them to go that way. Absolutely. But so some of the things that we've adopted, and I will tell you, it's in the last episode, there was some talk about, how has it impacted, what changes has this made? And really for us, unfortunately, the first thing is we had to start with our carrier pool. We started with knowing our carrier vetting practices, right? So that was step one. After these issues came to light and we started seeing a growing trend of, cargo theft and loss, we had to go back and look at, why our, top 5, top 10 carriers were being involved in this. Hey, what are your practices? Most of the time we went back and we found that people had a really solid process. Like they had a process in place. And they went to what looked like a reputable carrier and got scammed by the Gmail, or it's the carrier name and they added, changed out an I for a 1. They went to somebody who passed the basic checks and ended up being a fraudulent broker who then handed it off to somebody else to deliver to a different location. So the list went on and on of kind of how things were happening. So we went through our vetting practices with our carriers and understood where was everybody at. We found some carriers who had phenomenal vetting practices, and occasionally they still got caught up. Others, unfortunately, the vetting practices essentially eliminated if you weren't an established long-term carrier, you weren't going to do business with that broker. And quite frankly, that's how they protected themselves. We saw that as a win for us as a shipper because, hey, if this is who you're using for our freight, we appreciate that. But at the same time, if you're a new carrier, maybe trying to break into the business, you obviously weren't going to get any business there, right? So we started with understanding what's happening with our carrier partners. We also had to go to the asset carriers. People always ask sometimes, is it just brokers, right? There's also owner operators, right? There's other ways
Correct.
that cargo theft can occur, even when you think you're running with an asset carrier, depending on owner operator relationships. And I don't want to go too far down that path because it's certainly never intending to throw shade at any organization, but that's something we learned is it's not only we have to vet our broker practices, we also have to understand if we're running assets, how is that asset actually being ran? So that was one we looked at. Just to wrap this up, so I don't go too long and want to get to everybody else. But to wrap it up, what we had to do and what we're in the process of really still evolving is we have to know that if we give a load to a carrier, be it a broker or an asset carrier, that when the driver shows up at the door, he has to tell me who he's picking up for. And if that name doesn't match, we're not going to release that load. And what it's done, going back a little bit to the last episode, is we've added a hardship. We've added time to our shipping processes because now we have to wait for a driver who might not have that information on the top of his head to go get that and come back and make sure that who is picking up is really who they say they are. We've had to look at our own ratings. We've had to work with our carrier partners to, let them know, hey, who is coming to pick up this load, so then we can finish that validation. So there's a number of steps. I'm a little out of sequence on that, but what it's come down to is understanding how our carrier partners vetting, right? Is that somebody, do we feel that they're doing due diligence so that we are comfortable doing business with them as a shipper? And then we had to look at ourselves because even we found that carriers doing what we consider a good job, there were still things falling through the cracks, especially as, we've talked about we feel like whoever these people are, kind of the shadow figures that I haven't found yet, who are stealing the cargo, they're getting smarter. They're using technology in different ways. So you may have a vetting process that worked last year and it doesn't anymore. So that's kind of what we're up against is understanding, who do we want to do business? Who can we do business with from a carrier vetting perspective? And then what can we implement on the shipping side from warehouse point of view to make sure that when someone comes to collect our freight, it's the person that our freight team actually assigned that load to. So apologies, a little long-winded there, but
No, I
that's
think
kind of
that's what our
point
viewers
of view.
need to hear.
Yeah, appreciate it. There's, as you said, when you look at this, there's, I think it starts, in other episodes as well, right? We've talked about partnerships, and we certainly, as a shipper, we have to be comfortable that who we're doing business with is, I'll put it this way, that they care as much about our freight as I do, and that's a lot. And we've found there's a lot of fantastic operators out there who do, and they want to do a great job, and that's who we gravitate towards as a shipper, right? And they're coming to me with solutions and saying, hey, we put this new program into place because they are actively trying to combat cargo loss, and that's definitely a plus on our side, on the shipper side. But it also, I've had brokers, asset carriers, different ones come to me, and they'll give me tips of, hey, here's something your warehouse could do to potentially catch a fraudulent, carrier, fraudulent broker sitting in a carrier that's been unauthorized. So partnerships is the name of the game for me as a shipper.
Absolutely. I think that, we're getting back to what technology took out of the network. We've seen the fall of Convoy and the tech brokerage platform, the app, the paperless arrangement. We saw it go up, we saw it come down, and it would have happened, I think, I'm a firm believer that it would have happened much sooner if we didn't have COVID, which I think created a lot of the additional time period for everyone to see it. And now we've seen it, go up and now they've fallen. But I think it takes people. Elizabeth, what are your members doing to prevent it on their side, because the technology has outpaced? And what practices are they putting in place to try and stop the cargo theft?
Thanks, John. And I think I mentioned earlier, we run through the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association, we run the Carolinas Organized Retail Crime Alliance. And that is a group of loss prevention professionals partnering with law enforcement. And so in addition to all those internal best practices around those vetting processes and business relationships, sort of a little bit maybe further down the line within the spectrum, and I think you both hit the nail on the head, that to kind of go beyond the technology and build the relationships and build the partnerships, but their focus is really building those partnerships with their colleagues in the loss prevention space and retail, and also with law enforcement, and that's law enforcement from their local police chiefs, sheriff's offices. We've built relationships at the state level with the State Bureau of Investigation and Highway Patrol, and then with Homeland Security at the federal level as well. But a lot of that is really information sharing. We have an information sharing network through Aura where it's vetted. We have to verify your email, that your law enforcement, that you're working with that retailer, and it gives them the opportunity to share any of these types of incidents that they're seeing and happening either within their fleets or within their operations, so that it might be the same group of individuals that's then going after another company in another area of the country or in another state, but it gives them a relationship to lean on to say, and I think John, you kind of mentioned this in another form, but hey, this is what we're seeing. Are you seeing this too? And is this kind of tracking with what you're seeing? And so a lot of that is just allowing for intelligence sharing, but also when that gets to the point, if that gets to the point where you have an incident, then you have natural partnerships and relationships to hopefully be able to go after these individuals who are the wrongdoers, and potentially have other partners with you in that effort.
Wow. So you guys are getting proactive about it. John, your company's proactive about it. We're proactive about it. How do you get proactive from an insurance perspective, Kathy?
Thanks, John. We do insure quite a few property broker clients, and we try to guide them as best as we can. First and foremost, stay vigilant. And as Elizabeth and John both said, relationships, use trusted carriers. If you are going to be, hiring new carriers and go through that vetting process, make sure to thoroughly review paperwork, ask questions. If something doesn't look right, it probably isn't. Look for those red flags where, identities may be compromised and the property broker is hiring an entity that, is fictitious. What we strongly suggest is to independently verify the information when obtaining a certificate of insurance from that motor carrier, looking at their insurance coverage. Don't just take the phone number on the paperwork that's received. The property broker should research that company online and use a publicly posted phone number to verify the information and that entity is who they say they are. Review those certificates and insurance, do email addresses and phone numbers look suspect, or are there font changes on that certificate where it looks like it's been altered? And certainly we suggest getting those certificates directly from the motor carrier's insurance broker and not from a secondhand party that may have made alterations. And finally, perhaps implementing cyber training within organizations. We at Avalon perform cyber training and cyber risk training for our employees, so that they are better able to spot red flags and avoid situations that may open the company to cyber crimes.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.